G'day friends, and welcome to our next Soviet lens review. We've got a bit of a banger coming up for everyone today. In this case right here, I've got the Mir 47K. Now let's open it up even and take a look. It is the best ultra wide angle lens that the Soviets ever produced. It is a 20mm lens, f2.5 ultra fast aperture for a wide angle like this as well. So as you can see, it is a quite chunky lens. But before we go any further, let's take a look at what you're going to get in the case if you buy one of these as it was originally shipped. So as well as this nice carrying case, you are going to get yourself a nice little filter box. It's a filter disc even, which is pretty snazzy. So inside here, you do get yourself 3 filters. You've got a green filter there, a red filter, and of course a neutral clear filter also. And the funny thing about these filters in the Mir 47K is that they actually go on the back of the lens. More on that later. Now let's quickly go through the rest of the specs of this bad boy. So as I mentioned, 20mm ultra wide, f2.5, nice and fast. The aperture does go down to f16, so it's not going to get super dark. It has a minimum focusing distance of 0.22 meters, otherwise known of course as 22 centimeters. So you can actually get super close with this lens, which combined with the super fast aperture means you can get some really interesting shots. Now this one is the Mir 47K, and K is going to give you a hint that this is a Pentax mount lens. Now I shoot it on my Nikon Z6, easy to adapt Pentax to Nikon Z6, but it's worth noting for any of you that are thinking of doing the same, be a little bit careful because not all Pentax K to Nikon Z adapters will actually let this lens hit just on infinity focus. Some of them stop just a millimeter short because of the way the Soviets, manufactured, I guess, their K mount lenses. They weren't perhaps exactly within spec. Outside of that, this lens does have 10 elements of glass in throughout it, kind of tucked in there in 9 groups. So it's got a lot of glass and you can definitely feel it when you pick this up. It is not a light lens by any stretch of the imagination. And of course you can see the MC on the lens itself. That, as we now know, means multi-coated. So it means it is a little bit more resistant to flare. It means it will be getting a little bit of extra contrast compared to any of the old Soviet lenses that do not have the MC, that do not have that multi-coating on it. That's just about all of the specs. The only thing I should mention as well is, of course, this lens is the K mount, but it did come in an M42 mount as well. This lens I've got here though, as we can see from that marking right there, was manufactured by the VOMZ plant, which is not KMZ, it is not Arsenal, it is a different plant altogether, and somewhat related to the Lomo plant. But all you really need to know is that the VOMZ guys, if you really can try and avoid them, try and get the M42 KMZ Krasnogorsk version of this lens, because in all honesty, the quality of this lens, being from VOMZ, feels a little bit like Arsenal quality. So it feels a little bit like your Kmart quality lens. Outside of that though, build quality wise, I mean, it's a Soviet lens. It's made of metal and more metal. You know, you can definitely drop this and it'll still work the day after. It's just more so the really precise manufacturing tolerances where, you know, sometimes those things become an issue. So outside of that, we do need to talk about what the lens does poorly before we talk about what it does well. Now, this lens, it is 20mm, it is f2.5, which is why I was originally drawn to it. On the spec sheet, it's like, wow, a 20mm f2.5 lens, that's for a couple of $100, that's extremely cheap, particularly given that it's not a fisheye lens. That is true. However, corners of the image are definitely not the Mir 47's strong point. Let's just put it that way. It's almost got what I like to think of as a special effect, a special filter, if you will, that it pre-applies for you to the corners of the image to really draw your eye into the center of the image, which in my opinion is actually one of its best qualities. But you've got to love it or hate it with this one. Outside of that, it does have some problems, as with all old Soviet lenses. Their multi-coatings were not fantastic at resisting flare, so you're not going to want to put this in some sort of super, direct sun, direct light scenario. It will exhibit flare and won't be too good. Outside of that as well, this copy that I have, it does have a bit of a sticky aperture, which means I'll see if I can show it on camera here. But basically, if I stop down, there we go. So I'm actually past f5.6, but that's where the aperture is sticking. And sometimes it just needs you to tap the aperture auto control lever and it will flick down to the correct aperture. But apparently that is a somewhat common problem with this lens. And I've already mentioned the infinity focus issue when adapting to Nikon Z6, but generally you shouldn't let that scare you. This is not the lens for landscapes anyway, unless you want the corners of your image looking like you've pre-applied a blur and chromatic aberration and vignette effect on them all in one. So there we go. We've talked about the less than fantastic elements of the Mir 47K, but what about its good sides? What does this lens offer that your modern 20 millimeters, that your modern ultra wides just do not? And two things come to mind. One, it is absolutely fantastic at drawing the subject to the center of the frame. Whatever you are shooting with this Mir, you want it in the center of your frame. The spec sheet on this one, just to give you an indication, it had 60 lines per millimeter squared of resolution spec'd in the center of the frame, which is pretty sharp for an old Russian lens. And on the corners of the frame, the spec was 17 lines per millimeter squared, which, as you can tell by basic maths, is a third of the resolution. So you're literally losing 66% of your resolution as you head towards the corners of this lens. But that's fantastic. As I'm going to show in these next few samples.
Alrighty guys, we've got a few shots of the Mir 47K here. This one, a bit of an Indian buffet breakfast, and overall shows you that you can definitely get some nice images fairly close up with the Mir 47K with a close focusing distance of 22 centimeters. You can actually get surprisingly close to your subject. So here we go. We can see zooming into 100% in the center of the frame that we've got a sharp center of the frame here. Again, it doesn't look soft, and that's a true characteristic of the Mir 47K, is that stuff dead center or just about dead center is going to be in focus. It's going to look pretty tack sharp. Of course, the corners of the frame you can't quite see here, but they've definitely got that characteristic Mir 47K look. Bit of vignetting. This is shot at f2.5, and I think you can tell here that the colors this lens produces can be quite nice. This is color graded with a lookup texture, but still the base colors, the base contrast of the lens is not too bad. Here we go. We've got another shot. Shows what you can do with a lens as wide as a Mir 47K. Of course, at 20 mil, you're able to make what is in real life quite a much smaller sort of rectangular sign here. The Redfern train station sign here in Sydney. It really becomes a lot more interesting. Becomes the focus of the image. And, it doesn't have too bad colors either. I haven't graded this one quite as heavily. It's a lot closer to coming straight out of the camera, but with a few little tweaks applied. And again, you can see the vignetting around the corner of the frame, which I think in this instance really helps because the focus is this Redfern sign. So that's what the Mir does best. These little vignettes on the corners, the slight blur towards the edges that you can see here, draws you in with this leading line as well. So it's very obvious that Redfern, that's what you should be looking at. We do see up here a little bit of bloom, a little bit of chromatic aberration and fringing, which is one of the weaknesses of the Mir. Now, next up, we've got two images. These are not impressive images, but they do illustrate a pretty good point. This is shot at, I believe, around f8, thereabouts, between f5.6 to f11. Not a great deal changes. Now, let's say this is f8. We'll zoom up to the top corner. Look at that. That is obviously blurry. Looks like you've put a radial blur on this. I have not put a radial blur on this. But in the center of the frame, we are pretty sharp. So you're thinking, okay, well, it's pretty blurry around the corners. That doesn't look too good. Wait till you see f2.5. There you go. So this is the perfect way to show just what the Mir does at f2.5. These corners, as you can see, I'll flick between them again. These are, I mean, they come with a pre-applied effect. That's the best way of looking at it. It's like you've already put your vignette on. It's like you've already put a kind of radial bokeh blur on as well. That's what you're going to get in the Mir's corners. I mean, this is in focus, by the way. It is already just completely blurred, and there is no way that you should put anything that should be in focus close to these corners, because that's what you're going to get. But the great thing about the Mir is dead in the center of the frame. Whoop, if we zoom out to 100%, it's sharp. 100%. When you're looking at this on any normal, viewing device or anything like that, it looks sharp in the center of the frame at f2.5, and that's the key thing about this lens. F2.5, f8. The center of the frame really does not change that much. Now, what we can see in this shot here, the kind of busy bokeh of the lens. This is one of the lens's weaker characteristics. Bokeh here, it's a little bit busy. It's not the nicest shape, and you definitely get that kind of chromatic aberration around the edges of the bokeh. But again, sharp in the center of the frame. Color's quite nice. If a bit maybe subdued, you can definitely bump up the contrast, and feel pretty good about it. Again, another shot at f2.5. Got some Eggs Benedict here. Around the corners of the frame, you get the vignette, you get that blur that is kind of pre-applied. Still fairly, sharp in the center. Decent bokeh kind of close to the center of the frame as well. It's a lot more circular as you get closer to the center of the frame. But yeah. Next up, we've got some of my my favorite shots from this lens. I was just out today around Lidcombe, took a few shots here of, it was kind of an abandoned building thing that obviously used to be some sort of textile factory, I guess, and we can see the Mir flaring. Overall though, although you don't want to shoot this lens directly into the sun, it's actually better than a few other Soviet lenses when you're shooting directly into a super overexposed background like the sky, like the sun. It handles it slightly better. It is a multi-coated lens. The multi-coating used was a fairly modern for Russian multi-coatings, fairly modern one. And you can see here there's still a lot of contrast everywhere, which has been bumped up, but it's not a bad image. And I quite like the flare. And here we've got, once I can actually get it to load, another image which just shows the lens and shows how, because of this lens's sort of characteristics that are technically very poor, you actually get a much more interesting image because of it. Obviously, this is a fairly standard or fairly average, uninteresting subject. It's a bedpost on a street. But with the Mir 47K, you've got these really just unique corners that completely draw you into the frame. They're vignetted, and it's like almost a grey vignette. The radial / bokeh blur around the corners as well. It means that you are focusing on this subject in the center, and because it's a 20mm f2.5, there is not that many super fast ultra wides out there, and it also means that you can get something super wide like this shot, get a lot of context around you. You see the street, you see this industrial building here, you see a lot. and this very large subject. It was over a meter, this kind of bedpost thing, and you can still isolate it from the background. That's one of the really unique, great things about this lens. And again, if you zoom in to 100%, right in the center of the frame, now this has obviously been, post-produced, sharpened, but it's sharp. It's very sharp. You're not going to look at this and say this image is soft in the center, because it is simply not. And I really like the kind of color and the characteristic that it gave this bedpost. It's kind of fairly cool, and again, pretty cool wood effect there as well. A little bit up the top right corner of that bloom, of that chromatic aberration, the fringing around those super bright areas. But at the end of the day, I think it makes the image unique. It's a lot more interesting than if you were looking at this exact same image taken with a F11 smartphone photo. Here, it's obviously not going to win any prizes, but it's a little bit more interesting, and that is effectively the defining feature of the Mir.
So there you have it, the Mir 47K, currently one of my favorite lenses in my collection, just for that fantastic ultra wide look, the super fast aperture, and that amazing sort of post-processing effect that it kind of pre-applies to all of your images. Fantastic for drawing subjects to the center of the frame. But outside of that, I would definitely recommend people, if you're looking for an ultra wide, if you're looking for something fast that can create these really unique images that not many other lenses honestly can, and if you want a really cool kind of carrying case, filters with it as well, then the Mir 47 could be the way to go. Definitely recommend, if you can find a good copy of this in M42 mount, try and go there, because of course, as we know, M42 mount of this lens, or version of this lens I should say, was manufactured at KMZ. It was manufactured at Zenit, of course the best Soviet lens manufacturing plant back in the day. But there you go, guys. I hope everyone's enjoyed this Russian lens review, this Soviet lens review even. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more Soviet lens reviews. I'll see you in the next one. Das Vidania.